Cool.
Okay, so you're here with me and Brandon. We are the two head mods of the Intellectual Dark Web subreddit. Thanks for joining me today, Brandon.
Of course, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so the reason that we're getting together is because we wanted to essentially do something like a fireside chat with our community, because we think it would be useful from time to time. We've noticed that sometimes some of the things we try to tell folks through text announcements and stuff don't always get digested as well by folks. And I think one thing I learned from when I recorded myself going through reports one time is that people got a much better understanding of my thought process when they were able to hear me speak in real time versus just some sort of announcement.
Like a persecution.
Yeah, it's much more de-individualized, and so that's what we're here to do today. We're going to go over some things that we think are important to the subreddit and just the IDW more broadly. The idea is that these kinds of conversations we won't do frequently, so this podcast isn't going to be like a recurring thing. We're going to do them as we feel that they're necessary, and we're not aiming for any kind of schedule or regularity in this. So the first thing we wanted to talk about was like the structure of the subreddit. So Brandon, do you want to like sort of go into that and share your thoughts about how we got to like the structure of how it's governed?
Yeah. I'll kind of give a brief background, so just everyone kind of knows what's going on. It's funny because it's so big, man. It's like I think I joined as a moderator when we had about 3,000 people, and I know you were before that, Joe. So it's like I still remember when we were like under siege, at like 5,000, 7,000 people from like people from various. Whereas at one point it was like the Chapos and the Chapo trap houses, and then from that point I think something happened where we kind of pissed off. Like I think it was that point it was one of the actual alt-right subreddits, right? And it's just people coming with like talking points and like groups with like all names made together, and it's like I remember being so like we were at a point there was like a siege mentality, where it's like if you notice these like keywords, be on the lookout for people. But that was like years ago at this point, like things have grown so much. Like the subreddit is so big. I want to say we're over like 75,000 people at this point. It's really just not possible to kind of monitor everything said on every post, everything like that, to have one of us, looking at it, or even anybody else on the mod team. So over the years, right, we've kind of built up, you would almost say like a common law system of just referring to previous decisions that have been made, kind of previous decisions and baselines as kind of rules to go forward and kind of standards to apply. And so it's been tough, right? We are people. We have jobs. No one pays anyone to do this. So we're just kind of doing this because we think it should be done. And, hands on the wheel and all that. So there's a lot of, stuff that we just kind of, on the behind the scenes work that mods do that we don't, kind of make everything public. And, there's a sense of that where things are not public, where it almost seems like, shadowy figures, like, hey, they took down my post specifically to silence me. I still get a tinge of that when I get my stuff removed from other places. So this is really just to say there is nothing like that. We are, just busy people, right? Trying to figure out how to kind of manage everything that's going on while the world is crazy, and try to also keep the subreddit from that as well. So this is kind of just a view behind the scenes. I'll kind of let Joe take over from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of talking about it, sort of how different things were when we started versus where we are today. Yeah, I was like, when I first subscribed to the subreddit, we had like 1,500 subscribers, and I got offered a moderator spot around the time we hit 3,000. You got added to the team like maybe 5 or 6 months after I did.
Yeah, something like that.
And I don't think we were at 3,000, but we definitely hadn't broken 10,000 yet. And
yeah, I remember I was there when we hit 10,000, and that was like a big dude, we hit 10,000. Like look at that.
Now we're at 76K. Whew.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing that was different that a lot of folks now wouldn't remember, or they weren't even here to see it, was we did not create the subreddit. So while we're the two head moderators today, we didn't create it. A guy named Dave and Friends created it, and
the real Dave Rubin.
Yeah, he was not Dave Rubin. The Dave and Friends sounds very much like it could be Dave Rubin's account, like Dave and who are his friends? Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris. That was he just happened to be.
He did get accused of that at least once. I remember very specifically. People were like angry at him. He was actually
Yeah, he did get accused of that. Some people actually thought about it positively, and they came to him for help. And like Mr. Rubin, I need you to help me with this. And it's just, but no, he was a completely different dude, and he basically made the subreddit to protect it from that initial brigading phase that happened for like, I want to say it was pretty solid the first year of the subreddit. And I think it was about a year before we hit 10K. And thank God that he did, because anybody else could have done it, and it would have been a very different course of events. I actually think like if he hadn't done that, there's just like a lot of things that wouldn't have happened that have been very important. So he was basically sort of like the head mod. He was like the king, and he didn't micromanage us or anything, but we always like deferred to his judgment if he decided to exercise it. After about a year and a half into it, and he became less active, and he stepped out. But that's sort of like how things were then. Our focus at the time was even though Dave did successfully make the subreddit called Intellectual Dark Web, there were people from the far left and the far right who basically saw it as something like the space race, and they wanted to be the first to get to the moon and plant their flag on it. And so there were a lot of people bringing content here with that and trying to disrupt conversation. And some of them were like the chapos on the left, and some of them were like the alt-right people from like debate alt-right and communities like that. And
remember, we got our stuff shared there, and I think we got called. If I remember correctly, we got called Jewish shills. I know that's basic, right? Because it's just a standard insult. But we put up a post kind of saying like, "Hey, stop coming here to do this." Like if you want to like make race-only arguments, like that's what your subreddit is for. That's why it's called Debate the Alt-Right. Like, don't come over here and do that. Like it's just rather frustrating when you like, okay, well, I'm another post, another one, Charles, it's just constantly. And so so they mocked us for doing anything about it.
It's obviously a campaign when that happens. It's obviously a campaign when that happens.
Well, there's
especially
like
when it was
three
so
people
small.
pushing it. Yeah, like 3 people specifically sharing this thing. Like, okay, we get it, guys. That's your push. I understand. I'm not saying I don't think Reddit should do anything to you. I'm full free speech in that regard. You should have your subreddit. That's fine. But like, you're really disrupting something by trying to make it very specific when like that's not, the subreddit is not built to revolve around like race and IQ statistics, right? That's not really what it was made for.
Yeah, and it's one thing if it's a topic that comes up occasionally. It was a topic that interested me for a period of time, and it's different versus like today we'll have a conversation about this in the subreddit versus we're going to push this agenda in the subreddit.
Every single day, a new link pushing the same point. Like, okay, man, like, at a certain point, you're not on like the intellectual journey for truth. It's like, no, I know the points, and you guys all need to shut the fuck up and listen.
Yeah, and it was also very clear from the people pushing it that their goal was to, basically just say a bunch of mean things about like black people and maybe other minorities, and they just want to talk about
Jews, and the Jews too. Yeah. They really, not a big fan. You remember, well, Sam Harris is a Jew. Oh, I think Ben Shapiro. Oh, the Weinsteins too. Like, okay, all right, guys. That's, I noticed you made observations, about people's past. Look, I looked up their Wikipedia. They're a Jew. This invalidates everything that they said. Like, okay, dude, like, fuck off, man. This shit is, yeah. If my disdain is evident, it's because it was very frustrating to have to deal with at the time.
It was. It created a lot of work for us. And then, on the other hand, it's like they're doing that. The Chapos and other far left people who maybe aren't brigading are looking at that and saying, aha, see, I told you this is what the IDW is. And it's like...
No, and then they would share that to their point, be like, look, IDW racist confirmed. Like, fuck off, dude. Like, they were, if almost, because at least with the debate alt-right people, it's like, you could tell what they're doing. With the Chapos, it's like a segment of people who just wanted to come in and be like, actually, IDW bad and racist. Like, on every point. And it's like, fuck. It's just so like, okay, yes, I am aware that you think Sam Harris is a racist for having, blank conversation or something. I'm aware that you think Jordan Peterson is, just some like religious nutso or something. Your points are dumb, they're contrite, and I'm aware of them. Thank you for commenting. But they just do it so often. Just on every you can't you every post becomes about, well, actually, this guy is a racist. Like,
Yeah.
God, it's so weird to say that was like even before. I feel like the culture has gotten worse, but the subreddit has gotten better. As actual things have
There
gotten
are
worse,
things
we
that
have
are like
policed it.
there are things that are better and worse.
True.
So like I would say there was in some ways more chaos. Like just the subreddit was treated more like a battleground. We basically
Yeah.
we basically won the battle. It was a long drawn out campaign, but we basically eventually got rid of all the people who were going to spend their time bombarding the subreddit, and now we have sort of like a peacetime moment. And there are different problems that come with that because there's been a lot of growth, and so there's questions of volume. And COVID was a completely different thing. We'll get into that in a bit, but
Holy shit, yeah, we'll get into
yeah,
that.
I'm glad that I mean that was like the first real test because a lot of subreddits don't pass that test very well, and they get conquered, so to speak. And some very clever, manipulative people who are part of those efforts managed to find their way into moderator teams, and we not only managed to, I think, keep the content true to what the IDW is meant to be, which is having just free, open, honest conversations about topics that interest us, and not having to worry about being bullied or harassed for momentarily being controversial just because you're having thoughts in real time. We managed to strike that balance for the user element, and then on the moderator side, we didn't always have the best team members, but we didn't have like a backbreaking infiltration kind of event.
Yeah, I think there's only even one person, and we'll just say, let's remain unnamed, who was hard to work with. Even other people who've like joined and left have been nothing but wonderful people. There's just one specific person, and let's not name them. We don't name terrorists, right? They don't get the club.
Yeah, and that was just more of a personality quirk than any kind of.
That was.
Yeah, so unfortunate. Anyway, so yeah, after Dave stepped down, and after this phase, he kind of stepped down around the time that the problem changed as well. It just sort of timed out that way. We switched from being under the reign of King Dave to we were a body of peers, and so it was you and me, and then whoever our third mod happened to be. Eventually, that became on a consistent basis Bradicus. He's our third oldest, and he's been pretty good, level-headed. I think what's interesting about the three of us is that we don't all have quite the same politics. So I'd say we all are very close to the center. If we tilt a certain direction, that's where you can see the difference. But I think the tilt is smaller than our alignment to the center. So I would say I lean a little more left. I think you lean a little more libertarian, depending on where people map that. Sometimes libertarian is up or down.
Right.
And then Bradicus would lean a little bit more right. But and some people get really focused on that slight angular tilt. But we're all pretty, I'd say, more toward the center. And I've seen
none of us are. We're all pretty moderate, I would say. I don't think anyone here is, advocating a revolution of any sort.
Yeah, but I've also seen just like in the content that you guys moderate, you've dealt it to both sides. So like I've seen you guys moderate folks with in a disciplinary manner where you actually agreed with their ideas, but their behavior just wasn't acceptable for our subreddit, which is really much of our rules are just what you'd expect of an internet forum that aspires not to be toxic.
And
I've seen
I remember there was a guy specifically who would push like very like Milton Friedman-y economic points that I agreed with almost 100%. But he would just like call people dumb fucks and just you can't, like, come on, man. Like, there's a set of rules we've like agreed to play by. You can't just call people dumb fucks and insult them. Like that's not the way this works. Like you get a warning and then you've got to go, dude.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And sometimes it's not even as clearly hostile as saying dumb fuck, but like sometimes people will just consistently just call other people clowns, and they might say, "What, clown's not that bad of a word," but it's just clear that you're there to personally attack people, and
Right.
make them look dumb and make yourself look smart. And that's not the point of the IDW. And the subreddit's a finite resource. Um, there's a front page, there's an upvote system, and those kinds of attitudes. We don't want them filtering into those metrics and influencing what goes up and what goes down. We want the people who are influencing the number of upvotes and downvotes and the number of comment replies to be people who are actually aligned with that conversational value of the IDW. And there's a question about whether or not we're respecting free speech or not by cracking down on folks. But like, if the 10% of free speech that we restrict are people who are just there to be toxic and cancerous, I mean, I'm okay with that trade-off.
Yeah. It's like one of those, I'm, pretty hard libertarian on most social issues. So I have zero desire to censor people. But to me, I find there's like a very big difference in like, you can't say that, at all versus like, you can't say that here. Like, I'm in favor of almost whatever like words people want to say, but there are some places you can't, like in my house, right? Like if you want to come in and, advocate for communism, like you can do that on the, in the park or something. Like, you cannot actually come into my house where my wife and kids are and like, shield communism, right? And it's a bad example, but you don't just get to say whatever you want wherever you want. You have your subreddit to say that. If you want to talk about, why we should rise up and overthrow the petty bourgeoisie or whatever, like that's fine. Do that. Advocate, unionize, do whatever you want. But like if you're going to comment on every post with that same point, well actually dude, this would all be solved under communism. Like, you people are just too dumb to realize it. Read Lenin. Like, you can't, you've got to go away then. Go push that somewhere else. Like, you're not actually trying to have a conversation. You're trying to propagandize.
Right.
And like,
I
that's
think what
where
people
we draw the line.
Yeah, I think what people often forget is like when they talk about the IDW and what its purpose is, they get really focused on the I and the D, but they forget the W. The W, I think, incorporates a lot of things, but it's a web, it's a network, and the thread is a connection between two people in that network, and so that connection is part of what makes it. It's not the intellectual dark anarchy. There's some kind of relationship. There's an exchange from user to user, and that's why it's not just free speech, but civil discussion. Can you have an exchange with folks? Can you engage with others? One thing I've often said to folks is like who push back on this is just imagine if in the first podcast that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson did with each other, their reaction to their disagreement on what we mean by the word truth is, well, you're just a fucking idiot and a dumbass and a grifter. Like, the whole reason the IDW has an appeal to folks is because they didn't do that.
Right. They spent 2 hours getting nowhere trying,
And Sam Harris is kind of rolling his eyes in some of his conversations with Jordan Peterson, and yet he exercises that self-restraint and considers Jordan a friend. And like, a lot of people are impressed by that. They come to this subreddit, they fail that same test, and they get disciplined for that.
Yeah, very much so. It's it's like for people like that, for anyone who has the arguments, I would say, like, well, one, if you're coming at this, like, read your Peterson, then, Order and Chaos, I think it's from Why Nations Fail, maybe the Narrow Corridor, an economics book. This is the shackled Leviathan, right? This is the Hobbesian Leviathan. We have the ability to take action as needed for the overall good of the community. Well, who decided that? We did. That's how it works. I'm sorry. This isn't a democracy. We rule benevolently, because we have a higher standard, the law that we follow. You see.
Yeah,
And
the democracy, I think, is in the upvote system and whether or not
right.
you reply to people's content. And
right.
We're more like the judges in some ways. I mean, we do occupy all the branches. We legislate, execute, and judge, but we're more judges than we are anything else. And it just for like all the reasons the brigading threat was a real threat in the first years. You couldn't have a democratic system on Reddit, like for the moderators specifically.
Yep.
And so, yeah, we're basically our trick is we are benign despots, and we kind of have to make that case and do it convincingly to be legitimate. It's not necessarily easy, but that's the model we've chosen.
Yeah, so, I think the trick is we try just to generally not fuck people over and actually, hey, I was banned, but I'll not do that again. Can you let us back? Okay,
Yeah.
don't do that again though. And then if they do that again, well then you get banned again. But
Hmm.
you have to actually, over a course of years, uh, we try to embody the actual practices that we're talking about. Right? You
Right.
won't see us in the comments being like, "You stupid fucker, get out of the sub." Like that's not the way we're going to go about things. And hopefully we've shown that over enough period of time.
Yeah, and so where we are now is you and I are the two head mods, so we still have a five-member team, but we're no longer a body of peers like we were after Dave stepped down. We gravitated toward the model that we currently have, and currently the agreement you and I have is that we can both basically act independently, and if the other wants to veto the other, then they can, and so that's simplified things a lot. And a lot of that is related to the strike system, which is sort of like where our common law is built around. So I'm going to elaborate on that a bit. You chime in too, Brandon, as you see necessary. But after that first year, and we got to the point where I think this was after Dave stepped down and Brett was already on the team, we kind of realized going into it was probably like late 2019, early 2020. We needed a better way to like sort of track who was doing what because as the subreddit was becoming older, and so there was people were having histories of certain interactions. We needed a better idea of like what was going on. So we started, and for context, the whole time we've had a separate Discord server for communicating with the other mods, and so um, that's where we usually discuss things, not on Reddit through like moderator chat, but on Discord for something we have there. And Dave is actually still in there, but he's rarely online, so I don't see him that often. I do check in every now and then. Anyway,
We
we
also have
started.
so Ed was there for a while, and then Ed left for a bit, and now Ed is back.
Yeah,
And Ed has also been very helpful. And Cyborg is relatively new, right? Maybe 6-8 months ago, or is it more like a
yeah.
year at this point? But also
It
been
was
very very
it
helpful.
was it was like 6 to 8 months ago, and yeah, and
Yeah,
so
that's
they
kind of
they do some, they chip in here and there with some of the reports and the content. I would say you and I have always done the bulk of the report queue cleaning,
yeah.
um, and so we had more need for a structured system for that. So the longevity of the subreddit made just for keeping track of who's consistently causing trouble, and we're talking about separate from the issue of brigaders, who are just users that don't get along well with others and constantly create a torrent of drama that detracts from the conversation. And so we developed our strike system. Initially, it was the case that the first strike would be a simple warning, no consequences. A second strike would be maybe like a 3-day ban or maybe a bit longer. And then the third strike has usually always been a permanent ban. And one thing we began to do going forward was we eventually made the first strike. We did not keep it as just a warning for long. The first strike actually came with a 3-day ban. Then later on, the second strike would normally become like a 7-day ban, and then the third strike was still permanent. Our system was at first, before we gave a first strike. Well, so for a first strike, any individual mod could do that. They didn't need the consent of others. Before we gave a second strike, we would need a majority of the team to agree to it, and then before we permanently banned somebody, we would seek unanimity among the team to be sure about that. As the forum grew, and a lot of this happened in 2020, not only because of the presidential election, but because George Floyd was killed, and then
And COVID.
and COVID. So all these
Yeah.
things, and what Reddit started doing is shutting down communities that it thought were hate groups or misinformation sources or things like that, and created a massive like exodus of refugees that just came spilling into the IDW. We grew so much in 2020 as a result of that. And so the volume of our work increased, and because a lot of these people had their communities banned, or they themselves were banned by knee-jerk reaction moderators in other communities. A lot of these people are very unhappy as well. So we're dealing with angry people at high volume. It's a different problem than the brigading issue because the kind of things that they're doing is different. It was much more straightforwardly just violations of rules of cordiality and things like that. And so starting in the middle of 2020, I started making a spreadsheet in which I would keep track of everybody's name and linked to like the offending remark that got them a strike, and then that made it much easier because it was just so much at that point that we couldn't otherwise keep track of it. Another thing that made it tricky was it was in such volume that the time it would take once we were getting to strikes 2 or 3 to get the assent that we needed to put a strike on someone and kind of bottleneck the problems they create with a ban. It just kept on going. So first thing we did is we agreed to like just let a second strike be issued autonomously without consent of another mod. And then instead of unanimous consent of the team, we went more toward a super majority for a permaban. So we
I think we
made
just
it easier.
if one person could say no, right? But if two people said no, don't do it, then we would not do it. I think it's what
Yeah,
we
it
used.
sort of
Yeah,
depended on how many people were on the team at the time. So
right.
like when we had 3, it was um,
Yeah, and it three, a super majority and a majority are the same, right?
yeah, and so
Yeah, if it's two
yeah,
to
so
one, we're going forward.
with 3 it was like that, and then when we had 4, that period that we had Ed for a while, and then again a little bit later on when Ed came back, we added Cyborg. We would need like 3 out of 4 for a permaban, or 4 out of 5 for a permaban. As the volume kept going up, and COVID was a very unique topic because COVID angered people in ways that no other topic has angered people, and it just made. And I'm talking about like on either side of the issue, where you're pro-vax, anti-vax, pro-mask, anti-vax, whether you think Fauci's right, whether you disagree with him. People lost their self-control on that topic, and it was extremely difficult to for people to wade through it. And then not only that, there's not only that intensity, but like there was always a new COVID topic, always something else that came out and this study said this scientist said this person got censored for writing this about COVID. Just always something, and it just continually fed into itself. Does that sound about right too so far?
Yeah, it was, and like I agree with pretty much everything you said. And another aspect to it is there was also this push to, like, hey, you're letting misinformation go. You should be correcting people, like as though like we are qualified. Like I sell software. Like I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy. I have a good understanding of stuff. But like, I don't know enough to be able to say like, hey, it's 2 months into COVID. This argument you're making is wrong, and here's the data to back it up. Like so you just have to kind of let things go.
Yeah, it's just there are only maybe a handful of cases where somebody got misreported for misinformation and we actually acted on it.
Ended up doing anything. Yeah.
And we've got hundreds, maybe even thousands by now of reports for misinformation um, that we just have to brush aside because we don't know everything and we don't have the time to know everything. Because again, we have our own lives and jobs, and we would have to have the appropriate knowledge in advance of the report to do that. And there's only just a very small percentage of scenarios where we're going to have that knowledge. And
Right.
What, like for example, Brett Weinstein is a biologist, and yet people still doubted his ability to speak competently on the COVID pandemic, which is a matter of biology. Maybe it's epidemiology, or however you pronounce it, isn't his specialty, but he has some understanding of how that stuff works. And so, I mean, if Brett Weinstein's not considered a good authority on it, and in fact, some of his content is even considered the misinformation, like, what do we even say? We don't know everything. And then we would find that the CDC would reach different conclusions, we'll say, every 6 months or so about what's a good idea or not regarding COVID. So it's like, are we going to punish people for something that might be misinformation now, but then studies like before the end of the year show actually there's some merit to it? It's just it would be much worse to mass censor people on the claims of misinformation, especially as frivolously as they were reported.
Yeah, I had very little desire to, because it became like a culture war issue immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And in the sense, there's a sense that like all of the IDW has been a culture war. In a sense that's kind of, there is a general pushback against a woke culture, if you even want to say it that anymore. Things have changed so much since it was founded. There's things that were surprising are now just taken as social realities. But like we didn't want to take a side there. Like, I'm not going to tell you, well, man, hey, you really like Brett and he's saying this, but look, the CDC is saying this, but you should trust me. I've decided which one of these is right. Like I'm not going to make that decision. Analyze the information, do what you think is best. I'm making my own decisions for, me, and I'm not really telling other people what to do because I don't really want that responsibility. And I don't think our subreddit wants that responsibility. And
Mm-hmm.
and if we acknowledge that we're taking it up, then we could be expected to do something about it by Reddit or whoever else. That really wasn't so much of an issue when we had, 5, 6, 7, 10,000 people even. But like as we're growing, eventually the eye of Sauron gets on somebody, right? And so picking, even just starting to decide, we are editors, of what's misinformation and not. If it's at all questionable, I think it was best, and we decided this, just to leave it there, and people could argue, respectfully,
Yeah.
over, because it's, asking people not to argue about it is impossible, but just do it within the standards of how things are meant to be done here. And we
Right.
don't
And
we don't
so,
want to be the COVID deciders.
right. Yeah. And so, with that, like being the nature of the problem, the overall trend with COVID, with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter and the riots, and then the election, just all that stuff, the gradual movement we made was changing and tweaking our system to make it harder, well, make it easier for people to get banned. So we removed our internal agreements that would, how many people we need to get on board before a ban was issued, and then we also started increasing ban periods because it's just sort of I referred to it in an announcement one time as a ban tax, and so like a first strike went from like 3 days to 7 days, and then a second strike went from 7 days to 14 days, and then at the climax of the election season, things were so terrible. People were just so on edge. We raised strike one ban to 14 days and strike two to a whole month. That was the harshest we've ever done it. And then shortly after, uh, there was about a 2 to 3 month period after the election where things just died down. People stopped talking about stuff as much, and so we reduced the ban period accordingly. We went back to a 3 day ban for a first strike and a 2 day, a 7 day ban for a second strike. We've since raised it again to 7 and 14 respectively, and I've noticed that some things have died down a bit with some recent changes that have happened, but for the most part, I think that's a good balance to strike. I'm finding that the reports are some of the most manageable they've been in probably the last 2 years. I'm just hoping it continues to be like a stable feature, and if it is, maybe we can reduce the ban periods again. What do you think?
Yeah, it's something I always like to stress is very few people will interact with the ban hammer, right? This is 99% of people who use the subreddit will never be under some sort of, hey, you could stop doing this or you'll get banned. Most people simply don't do those things, it would seem. The people who do are a very small minority, and we try to give every chance we can for, like, hey, this was the problem, you know stop doing this and it's fine. Like, I remember there was one guy who, I don't know, he did something. It was just blatant, like he was cussing somebody out, insulting people. And I said, like, hey man, like, I commented publicly, I modded my thing. I was like, hey man, like, you're good, cut this out. This isn't how, And his response was something like, suck my dick, mod Jenny, or something like
Yeah,
that. And it's like, all right, dude, like, I don't know what you're thinking. Like, you have to get banned. Like, you can't, you're, throwing shit at the, at someone as they're walking through the street and being like, what, dude, I'm just, tossing my arms around, and, like, you can't do that. Like,
yeah,
we,
no,
we're not, like, we don't get paid to do this. I'm not the police. Like, just stop doing this, man. And it's like, hey, fuck off, loser. Like,
it's
okay,
amazing because I would say that as much as we've developed our strike system over time, um, it's still on the whole fairly simple.
right.
Simple, allows for quick decisions, and so you would think that it's not necessarily a precise system for always getting people who are actually the kind of people we don't want in our community, the actual troublemakers. But I would say, while it certainly could be more precise to some margin, that there is some sacrifice and precision we're making, it's not that imprecise. It's not like we're getting it right 2/3 of the time. We're getting it right like 90% of the time. And I mean, it often shows in just the reactions people have to the band. They like really try to like, intellectualize how they're a very obvious rule violation in some sort of fourth dimensional chess exercise um, that would not inform the way anyone does like a day-to-day interaction. Why? Oh, I'm allowed. This isn't a personal attack. My comment should be allowed. It's something I sometimes refer to as elective autism, where you have some kind of chip on your shoulder about something, if that's your approach to it. And then I just think, well, this is just the proof that the fact that I'd say, about 10% of the people that we ban actually recognize the mistake and make some improvement on it. And for them, a first strike is a first strike. In fact, most people only ever get one strike, either because they learn from it or they quickly learn where they're going to end up and they just don't participate in the subreddit anymore.
Do you remember the one guy who tried to rationalize his like being a blatant dickhead is like, I'm just disagreeable, man. Like, haven't you read Jordan Peterson? I'm just disagreeable, dude.
I've seen like 100 people like that by now.
Dude, okay, I get it. You're disagreeable, but like, you don't have to just cuss people out and call them like insults. Like, that's just, just disagree with them then.
Yeah. Well, so like, just to give like a number to folks, as of right now, at least from what I've been able to track, I don't think I've gotten everything that you and Brett have gotten, and maybe Ed and Cyborg here and there. But what I have in my spreadsheet since we started tracking it is of the 76,000 subscribers, 690 individual users have gotten a strike at least once. Some of them have obviously gotten 2 and 3, but that's how many unique users have been subject to the strike system. And so that's not a large percentage of the overall users. It's less than 1%. When you count people who don't subscribe, and there's probably some possibility that some of those people are also alts. It's even 100%. Smaller than that. Yeah. So it's when Brandon says only about like 1% of people are getting subject to this, like he's not wrong. Like the math bears it out, and most people conduct themselves pretty well, but it is that very small percentage that has like just a disproportionately corrosive and chaotic impact on the subreddit. And if we didn't crack down, and if we didn't bottleneck it, because some people have said like a 7-day ban is kind of harsh, and I would agree that it is in some sense. It is grudgingly that we progress to a 7-day ban, but it works. And the reason why it works is, one, you start with a 7-day ban. It's a big slap in the face that your behavior is not acceptable, for one. 2, it shuts you up for a week, which is to say, people don't have to deal with you for a week. So that takes some of the pressure off. It turns the heat down in the subreddit, and maybe it also gives you some time to cool down. A lot of people think that's harsh, but compared to much of the rest of the Reddit, you'll be immediately banned permanently over something they perceive, and not even based on like a coherent rule system on their part.
No, just like, you disagree with us, and so get the fuck out of our subreddit.
Yeah, and in some cases, like if the subreddit is that strict that they have a very singular purpose and they need to ban anyone that doesn't match up with it, I can get that. But sometimes, if you're posting in our art, it's pretty inconceivable that you would be banned for racism. But I did run into that problem. I got permabanned from our art one time. Thankfully, since I'm a moderator and I know how to talk through these, I sort of explained it to them, and they graciously just reduced it to a 2-week ban. But it was done, and a lot of other folks might not have the patience or the communication ability to navigate through that. So the net effect is a lot of people just get permabanned over silly reasons. We do take our time to analyze stuff. We don't catch everything, and we don't read every full comment thread to see everything that was exchanged, but we do think over, like, is this person is this an acceptable conversation to have? Is this person curious about what the other person's saying? Or is it just a polite disagreement? Is there any exchange of ideas? Or is this person here just to laugh at people that they disagree with and prove how smart they are and put others down?
And then screenshot it and post to like whatever subreddit they're in to mock the dumb people they dislike.
Yeah, there's that too. So I mean, that sort of informs our determination. And so the system is now, it's some of the strictest it's ever been. I basically can proceed with any strike, 1, 2, or 3, and a permaban without consulting anyone. And if Brandon wants to veto me on any of those, he can. And he has occasionally vetoed some of my decisions. I would say I take the largest share of handling the reports now. And I've also usually been like the main communicator with the subreddit in terms of like doing announcements and things of that nature, and just keeping the subreddit up to date. And I'm one of the few that's had my identity be public as well. Cyborg also does that. It's just he puts his real name out there with his handle, but he just still uses his handle for things. I do it a bit more prominently, so in some ways it just sort of makes sense for me to do that as well.
Yeah, I definitely was more active upon a time.
Yeah.
There was a time where, and I don't know how to look anymore, but it used to be if you would look by like karma, I had the most, and I would I would brag about that one that I was very proud of. I don't think moderator karma counts, Joe, so I might still have beaten you, because you don't
Oh.
actually get credit for those upvotes. That doesn't work that way.
Oh yeah.
From the community.
I still
You know,
I still got a lot of upvotes for
yeah,
my other
yeah.
stuff, like my art and my
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
my
you did
conversations.
get a bunch of gold. You got a bunch of gold for the painting. I remember that specifically.
Yeah. And so for context, actually during this period from the spring of 2019 until about the end of August that year. So like from like February to August or something like that. I lived in my car, and I did an artwork on Microsoft Paint about it of the top of the parking deck where I was living at the time, and I posted it on art, and it got 5,800 upvotes and gold and stuff. And it was my most upvoted thing. So just a quick aside there. And some other things I did got some good feedback, but that was definitely my top post.
Yeah, that's the art is always something I would be jealous of because I have no artistic ability at all. But that's can't have everything. No, but there was a point where I don't put my name on here. I do have. I'll keep things a little personal, but I do have. My son is about 6 months old. I have daughters a couple years older than that. So I got a promotion at work. So I've been swamped. I probably have not been as public as I would like to. So I am almost more of like a consigliere for Joe. He'll kind of run ideas, like, hey, what do you think about this? And most of the times it's, yes, I agree with you, and sometimes it's like, hey, what about this? And then 11 answer. And then it's like, all right, now I agree with you. That's pretty much where we're at. So yeah, the two of us are most of what you would say I guess we make most of the high level decisions, right? And so that's kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, and that's sort of why like us becoming the two head mods was like a natural step, because I mean we were just even as busy as Brandon has been, it's just he still I think makes pretty good time commitments to things, and um, has helped with some of the problem solving, even if he's not always policing it
Yeah,
as
I'm just
much.
less active. I used to be more active with like putting my own opinions on the sub. Like that's I remember
Mhm.
when I applied for the moderation, it's because I was like on, constantly putting my opinions out there. And
Mhm.
it's almost like as I've gotten, I was going to say as I've aged, that sounds so boomerish because I'm approaching 30, but I'm almost, it's like I don't really want to argue my opinions. I think that my opinions are right, right? So I don't even know how much I want to argue. So I just try
Yeah.
not to. I try not to argue too much about my opinions. I guess it's more of like, hey, we're as a moderator, I should be not doing that. And that's probably, wrong. You don't have to do that by any means. It's just, my bandwidth is if I have a limited amount of it, it's probably more helpful to Joe and everybody else, behind the scenes.
Yeah. And I appreciate everything you've done. So with all that laid out, let's kind of like go over then, with our subreddit history being what it is, what the state of the IDW generally seems to be. And I'm not just talking about the subreddit, I'm talking beyond that. And then like, what our role in it as moderators and as a subreddit is. The way I see it, um, Eric Weinstein initially coined it as kind of being this broad community. Um, that was sort of how it was pitched. When Barry Weiss did her article shortly afterward, it gained more of the connotation of being like a celebrity circle of people like Peterson and Shapiro and Harris and the Weinsteins. Um, and so that there were those sort of two competing ideas, and I think the celebrity circle was the dominant one at first for like the first half of I would say, the lifetime of the IDW, with it being, I think it's almost 4 years, pretty exactly now.
100%. It was like, look
Yeah.
at this new Sam Harris video, look at this new Jordan Peterson video, and then a
Mhm.
bunch of people would like argue over whether or not they were good or bad, things like that.
Yeah, and like the seeds were planted in late 2017, but the concept was like coined and minted by about this time in 2018, and so over time it gravitated, I think, both in how the subreddit has treated it and how just people in general, and even I think the circle of celebrities have treated it as a community of folks. And so I think it's why you can have some folks who are seen as later additions, like John McWhorter or Coleman Hughes, um, or Lex Friedman, weren't part of that initial article, weren't even really known before then, but have since been included, or associated with it. And then, of course, I think more people in the community are sort of having like a Kiwis Romanus Sum attitude, like I am IDW, in the way they go about conversations. And it's not just I follow the IDW, it's something that I myself do as well. That is a mentality that I've seen be more common. And it's something, I feel myself. It's like when I'm in conversations with folks, it's like I'm very more, as a consequence of just being involved in this long, self-aware of like, how am I engaging in the conversation? Am I being fair to the other person? Or am I being genuine with my expression of the ideas and that sort of
Right.
thing?
Well, so I'll often like denigrate people, opinions. Like I'll read something and I'm like, God, what a dumbass opinion. And then there's like another part of me that's like, well, actually, dude, if you think about it, and it's like constantly trying to like, argue these people's points, the best that I can. And I don't know if that was always there, right? But I find it very helpful, right? Because, the part of me that wants to dismiss, the other part of me is like, no, don't do that. Like, let's hear what they have to say. Um,
Yeah.
it's like just for an example, kind of as we're touching on like the broader IDW. So I was at a like a month ago. I went to an Astral Codex 10. That's for Scott Alexander, the guy who was previously behind Slate Star Codex, kind of a big celebrity in like the sub niche, blog post writing guy. They had a meetup in Austin for people who subscribe to the Substack. And I actually met and talked to him and Chris Williamson, who's the guy who does like the Modern Wisdom podcast. I know Jordan Peterson's been on there a couple times. People like that. And one of the things that people mentioned is like, what happened? Like the IDW was like a cultural force, and now it's, like it's I don't want to say dead, but like the celebrity aspect of it definitely is. Like there's no team anymore. Like, Dave Rubin is posting Dave Rubin stuff. I think he's with like the Blaze. The Weinsteins and Sam Harris are at an impasse where, they talk bad about each other on podcasts. So, but I don't think the celebrity aspect of it was ever the most important part anyway. It's like a
Mhm.
framework to have conversations, right? And to go after knowledge and try to, get to the bottom of things, right? Try to figure out how things actually seem to work. Um,
Mhm.
and so I
No,
don't
I
think that
agree.
that celebrity breakdown really should change anything about our goal, or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a post about what Ben Shapiro just said or what Jordan Peterson just said will always be semi-relevant in our subreddit.
Right.
We're not going to tear down our statues, I'll say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm skeptical of people who say like we have to be so rigid about what the IDW is and who's part of it. Interestingly, there's been a lot of posts on the front page lately, like, why doesn't the IDW talk about this? And when they say that, they mean the Weinsteins, Harris, Peterson, Shapiro. And what's interesting is when they make those kinds of posts, they always have a different list in their head of who is the IDW and who isn't.
Right.
There's some common things, like almost everyone's going to have Jordan Peterson on that list, but some people don't count Dave Rubin anymore, for example. I think time has been an interesting test for folks, because I think the way Dave Rubin was beforehand is different than he is now. I think he actually changed a bit. I don't think he actually walks that good of an IDW walk anymore. I can see it in his content. What's interesting is people never really had a high opinion of him. Like, I remember there were some polls when it was more celebrity focused about who's your favorite. And Dave Rubin was almost always at the bottom, which says to me people had kind of uncertain feelings about him from the beginning, and then he's basically become more like just a Fox News pundit with his own platform. He's not on Fox News, and that
Yeah.
is what it is. But I feel like
When
that's
he started,
the
when he
point.
like embraced libertarianism and started repeating like libertarian talking points, I lost all interest because I already held those beliefs, and you're a bad, advertisement for them. Like he just like when he went on Joe Rogan to talk about like why the free market is better than like you don't need government building regulations. Like he just like butchered that argument. Like it was terrible. Like I think Michael
Yeah,
Malice went on like a month later and just rebutted every single point Joe had because it's not a good point. Anything the government can do, the market could do better. I firmly believe that, except maybe like national defense, right? Which there's a free rider problem in the national defense inherently built in. Maybe firefighting too. But like for most things, like building regulations, the market can solve that. Malice explained it. Go back and watch the podcast. But when I'm listening to Ruben say things like that, it's like, all right, I don't need to listen to anything else that you have to say. Like there's nothing, you've reached a point where like I feel like his intellectual journey is done. He has reached the conclusions that he has decided I'm going to hold. I still
one
subscribe
thing
to
that
his
stood out to
podcast.
me, yeah, one thing that stood out to me is I think that really sort of signals what his issue is. I mean, he will talk about how he used to be on the Bernie side of things, right? So he used to be more supportive of government programs. Um, and despite the fact that he used to be there, he seems to have no way of putting himself in the shoes of people who still feel that way about things.
Right.
And they're a bunch of crazy communists now. And I'm like, how do you do that? There was something off about Dave. I kind of held out hope for a while, but it's just I know there are probably some people who are still fans of Dave Rubin here, but I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you just need to call a spade a spade. Some people fail the test
Yeah,
of
Dave is
time.
he's now like the gay conservative. Like hey, look, I'm a conservative. I've got all the same neocon talking points, but I'm gay. And it's like, well, hey, in one aspect, it's good that that's accepted now. There's a time when it wasn't. That's a positive step. But on the other hand, I have no interest in you talking and you're in me listening.
Right.
Like do what you want. I still subscribe to his podcast. I think I listened to one he did maybe like 2 months ago because the title of it interests me. But most of them, I just click the play button and move on with the other stuff I've got to do. You know, um, it's no. I was going to say it's no slight against Dave personally, but obviously it is. There's no way to make that sound not like a slight. It's just not so much. There's nothing he's really saying that is of interest to me. Like,
Yeah.
Coleman Hughes has like talking points that I did not, know and can advocate as well. So like, watching him come out over like the past like 3 years or so, into his own like force has been interesting, right? Because, he has some things that I don't already completely agree with everything, and so with Dave, it was like, in one hand, like he's become more like in agreement with what I believe, at least in like economic perspectives. But like that, yeah, I don't feel like the transformation was genuine. Like he just so quickly was like, oh, I'm not with these guys anymore. Now I'm with these guys. Like, you didn't have to just pick a side. He jumped right over like the Sam Harris middle thing that I think he was agreeing with, like all the way through. He made like the full journey from like young progressive to old conservative in 2 years or something. So
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because when he did his spin-off show shortly after his time on the Young Turks, but then for a lot of folks, the start of his show was when he sort of rebooted it in his current studio, with the fancier looking place, and his first guest was Sam Harris for that.
yeah,
And so he had some appreciation for that at some point, yes, but he basically did not have a Sam Harris phase of any kind. I think what's interesting about Sam Harris is I think the test of time has actually been very good for him. I think it's shown that he's very sincere. And even though he famously turned in his IDW card shortly after the 2020 election, um, and or maybe it was shortly after the January 6th thing. I don't remember exactly, but in that period of time, a lot of people said, "Oh, I knew Sam was fake," but I'm like, no, like Sam is proving that he thinks for himself,
yeah,
and he turned in his IDW card for the same reason that he canceled his membership on Patreon. It's just he thinks for himself, and he will disagree with the mainstream when he thinks it's wrong, and then he'll disagree with alternative sources when he thinks that they're just too far down a rabbit hole and aren't using common sense anymore. And
yeah.
yeah, there aren't a lot of people like that. And I think one of the unfortunate things is that there are some folks in the IDW, because we tolerate people that are disagreeable, who are skeptical to a fault. Where I've seen it recently on the Russia discussions, and I even talked about it with folks. Where I did one post sort of explaining why the Russian invasion of Ukraine has struggled, and they had a short walk to Kiev and a far superior military in terms of resources. They should have just gone right in and been a knockout blow, blitzkrieg style, but they failed, and they failed because that means they suck about something at war. Like that's just and so a lot of folks were replying saying like, well, I think you make good points, but the establishment wants us to think Russia's losing, so I don't know what to believe in anymore. And I'm just like, look at a map. Kiev is not in the middle of Ukraine. It's close to the frontier. It's close to the border. It would have been too easy to just move right in on Kiev and just completely change the regime. If NATO had done this invasion with the same number of men and materiel, they would have just done it better because they're better at war.
And they would have established air superiority.
Right, like results speak for themselves. They don't have Kiev. It should have been easy to take Kiev. They don't have it. That's just a fact on the ground.
I remember I was arguing with somebody, and I'll just give more context. So I grew up in rural Texas, very, very rural town with like no Walmart, no nothing like that. One like 2 gas stations, 1 fast food restaurant. So I consider the rednecks my people. Like those are the people I grew up around. So like I'm on my Facebook and I see somebody like I'm rooting for Putin. And it's like, so I'm like, why? And he's like, well, the media says Putin's bad, so that means that Putin is good. I'm like, I had to like log off. Like, that's not.
Yeah, that's like, not thinking for yourself.
No, you're an NPC. Also, like those people that you're making fun of. Just rather than like I support the current thing, you're an I oppose the current thing. Like, okay, I don't know, man. If you like think that's better, then okay, do what you want, dude. But like, you're not thinking. Like you don't. I don't know. You don't need to be like a large brain to be like, you know what? National sovereignty, seeing that we exist in a system of nation states. You shouldn't actually just be able to change the lines anymore. Be like, actually, I would like the U.S. to extend a little further south into Mexico, and so then we just roll the tanks in. Like I would like to think that I would be against that for the same reason.
Yeah.
But there is enough people who just are not. They don't really think for themselves. They just oppose whatever they're being told.
Sure, and I noticed that about COVID as well. It was so weird to me that COVID became a partisan or a culture war issue. Like when it happened and it was clear to me that had happened, I thought, why the fuck did this happen? This doesn't make sense to me. And I've actually learned that like eventually, I think some of it even may have to do with the initial problem we had in our subreddit where people from both sides were trying to plant a flag in it, is whenever an issue comes up, people are going to try and plant a flag in it. And there's this voraciousness of the culture wars where it will not let you be independent and it will force you to take a side on something. It will use its memes offensively to put you in a camp, basically. And
yeah, they need to categorize you in their brain. It's like, hey, what sort of category can I put you in where I don't need to listen to you anymore? Like, and so, for a lot of people, that's like, I think you said it earlier, like I despise like the throwing around of like communist, fascists, like, those were real things, like the fascists, when there was an actual like fascist versus communist issue, like in Germany, when they were the 2 biggest parties, like they shot each other in the streets, like, I have yet to see like the Biden bros meet like the Trump fans, and have like a shootout or something. Like that's just not, I mean, I guess we have one incident, but for the most part, like that's just not really what's happening. Like Joe Biden is actually not a communist. Like if you actually want to look at things, like why are all of the credit card companies headquartered in Delaware? Not all of them, but a ton, because there's some sort of specific interest rate thing, and who pushed it? Joseph Biden. So that was the credit card company's man in the Senate. He is not a communist. Like it drives me crazy. Like he's not a communist. If you want to say he's too far left for me, that's fine. He's to the left of me as well, but he's not a communist. It just like drives me crazy.
Yeah, and I remember even that happening like with Bernie when he wrote his book Our Revolution. It was a bestseller, made him millions of dollars. You know, it's a personal book that he wrote, so he made the money. And then a lot of people on the right were like, "Well, Bernie, doesn't this make you a hypocrite?" And he said, "No, I'm not a communist. You just said I am." um, there's nuance to it, and nuance. Obviously, a lot of us are in the IDW because the left does not apply nuance to the right. But there's a lot of failures on the right to do it to anybody left of them, even people who themselves aren't necessarily on the left. Um,
Yeah.
and I would
I
just
see a lot
say,
of like, the New World Order plotters. Like the big one I see now is like we need to watch out for this like Klaus Schwab guy. I mean, I don't, I've looked into it a little bit, but like what a terrible name to have, for like to be the New World Order plotter, Klaus Schwab. You just sound like the leader of a plot.
yeah. And I would just say, like, so the people who do that, whether they're the left and the right, they're always thinking in a partisan way and putting things in this partisan framework and not applying nuance. Those are the people that usually get banned because that sort of attitude inevitably leads you to break rules like don't make personal attacks, apply the principle of charity, don't willfully mischaracterize, which are probably the most commonly broken rules we have.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's almost like there's a level of intellectual fervor and like commitment that like if you actually think that all Republicans are fascist and you actually think that because you're deluded, then I understand why you're railing about it all the time. You think the frickin' stormtroopers are coming. And so that's fine. Believe what you want, but like you cannot do that here. Like your delusion is not acceptable, right? Not acceptable here. Go comment about why the fascists are in control of blank number of state governments on your Facebook page or in another subreddit. But this is for people actually looking to come to like honest discussions, right, about where I don't actually know everything, and so like let's talk about it and see where we disagree.
mhm.
That's idyllic, but like that's the goal. The goal is not to be like, all right, everyone who disagrees with me is a bad person and these people disagree with me, so of course I can insult them and tell them how evil they are because they are, you know,
Yeah.
and like that's just that attitude is not productive for what we are trying to do.
Yeah, and to a lot of those folks as well, when we reprimand them, all they see is some kind of partisan bias on our part because that's how they see the world. That's what they see in us. And so we have been accused of being the subreddit is regularly being accused of being taken over by the far left or the far right. It just depends on who we reprimand. And so it's just they can't both be right. I would
Yeah,
say if we do have a political bias, if you just look at results, it's towards centrists. Um, and I would say that's simply because centrists don't break the rules a lot. So they don't draw our negative attention.
yeah.
They
If I were to shout my political commitments that people will take is I'm actually a fan of like the liberal democratic capitalist world order. I actually think it's good. Um, and so that's kind of where I'm at. And so I am a shill for the neoliberal world order in that aspect, and I'm pretty proud to do that. So if you're advocating like a violent revolution, be it to restore the traditional Catholic whatever, or so the proletariat can seize the means of production, I'm probably against you, just as a good general rule.
Yeah, I mean, I like some elements of the world order myself. One, I like that America is a leader in it. I think
Yes,
so much
indeed.
of what makes America great for the first time or again is the fact that we have that advantage. I like that we have good relationships with countries like Japan, Great Britain, Canada, much of Western Europe, and other countries here and there. I think that's useful to America, more useful than if we were isolationist. The reality is we can't be isolationist. We learned this after World War
Yeah.
II.
We are an
Um,
imperial power at this point. You don't
and we
get to
have
do.
to be. If
Yeah.
we won't, somebody else will do it. And it's just if we had left that vacuum unfilled, the Soviets and the communists would have filled it, and it would be a much worse planet. And even though the communists are gone now, it's a bunch of radical Islamic states could fill it. It's just a bunch of people, for all of the flaws of the West, a bunch of people who would do much more damaging things would fill that void. And that's kind of a tangent, but the bottom line is with the centrists is um, often they're centrists is because they've looked at a bunch of different ideas. They see the nuances of each of them, and they incorporate things from the left and the right, from libertarians and authoritarians, and come up with mixed things. And so they'll agree with markets in some contexts. They'll agree with governments in other contexts. They'll agree with the individual versus the collective, depending on the context. And because they have an appreciation for that being in the center, when they engage with somebody who is more tilted one way, they're going to see the merits, some of the positive things in their things, and apply the principle of charity to them, even if they disagree with it. It's just, it's more in their nature to do that. And as such, they don't get reported as much. But the people who see a centrist, let's say you're on the far right, you see a centrist, they look like a lefty to you. And so they're going to be hostile to that centrist, and so the far right person gets reported. And rather often, the people reporting the offenders are probably people in the center who are tired of this bullshit, and they just want to be treated respectfully. And I understand that because I've run into it myself, whether it's in the subreddit or not. I think that kind of gets to like what is important and special about the subreddit is I would guess that, especially at the current size, it is like the largest focal point of the IDW across the planet. Like, I don't think there's a space or in this community and in this broader concept that is as active and populated as the one we have on Reddit. Obviously, there are other places like different forum websites, different things like Discord, different servers, but ours is sort of like we're what the city of Rome was in the first century compared to the rest of the world, and I think it would be a shame if it were to be lost. So I'm sort of motivated by the fact that there's a real benefit to people, something that is bigger than myself, that by just continuing what I'm doing, it's allowed to continue. We felt this way even when it was 10K subscribers. Like, it was a very large scale, valuable.
I think the battle was more hostile then because winning was more conceivable, right? When there's like 5,000 people and, only a small subset of those are active, like, me and my 4 buddies or my 4 alternative accounts, I'm not sure, we can like actually, kind of raise hell and influence opinion, you comment on this, you immediately have 5 upvotes it's at the top, you're abusing the system, so the subreddit is big enough now. It'd be hard to win. Like, you can't, conquest is difficult of a populated urban area. You can't, especially when you have no ability to remove the civilians. They're just stuck in the city, right? They're on the subreddit, even no matter how popular your opinions are, you can't remove them. So I hopefully, I express hope that we are past the period where people think they can actually come in and, take over the subreddit. Just like, for example, if you ever want some fun, you can look at the Dave Rubin subreddit. Not to shit on Dave any more than I already have, but his subreddit was lost. Even when I actually think I still might have been kind of a defender of his when his subreddit was lost. That was very, very early on. And now I don't so much weep for it anymore. But just for example, it's supposed to be his official subreddit, right? And it is, let's say, against him.
That's right. And we avoided that happening with our subreddit for sure. And so that's a good thing. I think you're right in the sense that brigaders have a much harder task if they ever want to try what they were doing again, because the subreddit's so large that you're going against a much larger user base. It's harder to manipulate the upvote system with just our normal base of users having compounded to what it is now. And I think the real concern for me is, as large as it is, if something were to go wrong, the damage is therefore much greater. Part of why the sack of Rome in 476 was so tragic is it really become this amazing place that had not ever existed before, and it was just destroyed. And
we have to go back further, though. We have to find whoever Commodus was, and stop him before he does anything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've avoided that problem, but I think what we've seen is Reddit and a lot of other platforms, in some cases, will ban or quarantine or do something, shut down communities based, I think, sometimes too much on impulse and less on an honest review of what's going on. To date, we've never actually been warned by the Reddit admins on anything. Only communication.
No, we've never even talked to them, have we? I don't think so.
No. Only communication we get is mod newsletters that they send to every moderator on the site. If you have a subreddit, you're the moderator, you'll get a message from them whenever they announce something like new features on the site. But we've never had any kind of message from the admin saying, there's a problem with your subreddit, we are warning you. Nothing of that tone. politely or impolitely. It just hasn't happened. I'm grateful for that. But we also know that Reddit may not necessarily give us a warning, and one day we might wake up and there's no IDW subreddit, and that is a troubling thing. Some of the things we've tried to do is kind of be ahead of it with some mixed results from how the community responds. Is we've done like that spinning the web thing. We tried to create other subreddits. They haven't really taken much with a lot of folks. Of course, we made the IDW Discord. Mainly I do. Brandon's
Yeah,
not.
I have almost zero involvement with the Discord.
Yeah, he's in it, but he's not an admin on it. Cyborg is, and then we got one other who's not a Reddit moderator. So we're kind of semi-independent. There are certain crossover decisions between the two subreddits that happen, like for my part and sometimes with Cyborg's part. But we've been trying to develop other resources and other spaces that the community can use in case something like that happens. It's basically Elon Musk's strategy of if you populate different planets, it's harder to wipe out humanity in case one of them gets like overrun by like a thermonuclear war.
The Reddit meteor will only take out one of our civilizational outposts.
Yeah, so if we could have multiple subreddits and even like operate on other platforms like Discord. We've also been looking at Element, which is run by matrix.org. We're hoping that'll give us some sort of like insurance against that kind of thing. But still, the subreddits are our most precious resource, and part of why we keep at it and do what we do is we don't want to get complacent about it. We don't want. I mean, I've been told more times than I can count that the subreddit is the only community folks have to talk about anything, and they're not just talking about on Reddit or on the internet. Sometimes this is like to have conversations, even counting people they know in person who are friends and relatives. There are conversations they can't have with them because it will completely just destroy their personal lives. And I mean, just going by the people who told me this, I have to imagine there are potentially thousands of others who haven't yet told me this, but have thought it. And I worry about the social and psychological consequences of people who are that backed into a corner with the state of the culture wars, and then they lose like whatever last resource they have. And I think it would lead into that kind of what Jordan Peterson describes as like a descent into nihilism and self-destruction and destruction, not just of the self, but of the world around it. And I think there's actually, it feels very self-aggrandizing to say, but I feel like the subreddit being what it is has been tremendously valuable to a lot of folks.
Yeah, and it's one of those, I hate to sound like I'm quoting Marvel, but it is one of those like things from, I think it's Civil War, where it's like the safest hands are still our own. Like I feel, we have our hands on the wheel. We've been pretty successful driving it so far. We've avoided the Reddit, crash where they completely destroy everything. I think some of that was at a certain point we were small enough, but even as we've grown, we haven't really run into anything like that. I like to think anything obvious, like anything out of bounds, we just take action on, pretty immediately. So far so good. And yeah, like you said, it is something we wouldn't want to see fall apart, right? Simply because the amount of time and effort we've kind of put into getting us where we are. It'd be a shame to see it all go to waste.
Yeah, and it's taxing. It's a lot of work, and some folks noticed there were some personal impacts on me that caused me to delete my original account. So it's not like this is all fun and games. I do it because I think it's valuable, and I do care about what the collective impact is for everyone who subscribes, or even if they don't subscribe, if they pop in frequently. Both the subreddit, the Discord, and any other places we may occupy, and I'm hoping we can continue to sort of like flower as a community and continually like shed some of our more negative elements, become more of I think a proactive, positively inclined things rather than sometimes we have too much of a doomer mentality. I feel in our community, but I'm not going to ban people for that. But I do hope we can find ways to sort of encourage people and be helpful guidance for those who want it. That's why whenever folks come in with like projects and and maybe other things they're working on, like maybe they're making an app that's relevant to the IDW, or they have an interesting blog or something, or they do a podcast. I encourage people to share that, within reason. We have the no merchandising rule to keep out like spam accounts, like, buy my Etsy ceramics. But the no merchandising rule, we get reports for that often just from folks who are just
don't like something someone said.
Yeah, and it's just no. I like entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs do things, and as long as it's not purely a money grab and it's relevant to the IDW, I encourage those folks to step forward. Because I certainly can't do it all, and the moderators can't do it all, but and certainly the celebrities can't do it all. A lot of people thought like Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin and people like that were going to step up and build this whole other society for them, and that didn't happen. And some of it was because shit happens. So Dave Rubin got sucked into a bad rabbit hole. Jordan Peterson had some personal problems that very understandably interfered with that. And if you just pay attention to Jordan Peterson's lessons, if you're waiting for someone like him to step in and fix society, you have a victim complex.
Yeah, you're failing. You're failing from step one.
Yeah, you're not taking advice. You as a user in the community need to step up and think of something. What is something beneficial I can do for the community? That's why we adjusted the rules recently to allow people to get a strike removed if they can come up with some kind of positive project for the community. You might think of it as like community service in a sense, but it's like if we're going to with the volume of problems being with it, I'm not in any way motivated to remove strikes and let people back in who really work to earn their ban. But if we are going to make an exception, it should be something like, how are you showing a change in which you can think positively and get outside of your head as I need to prove these people are stupid idiots and that I'm better than them. You have to show some sort of benevolent impulse, and that's the sort of the logic of it is, are you willing to bear a burden of being? Are you willing to see the darkness in yourself, contend with it, and become something better? And even if you haven't gotten a strike, I would hope that people are still having some kind of personal evolution in that regard, and that if they see an opportunity to manifest it for everyone else in the IDW, that they'll do so. And if you see someone else doing that, don't downvote them. I've noticed that whenever people are proactive in this sense, they often get a lot of downvotes from folks who are like, oh my God, this is just a subreddit for discussion so we can talk about how much wokeness sucks. And it's just, I don't want these pathologically unhappy mouth breathers are not people I want really to be driving the course of the subreddit. Obviously, I can't control that, but I can encourage certain behaviors that I think will be just better for everybody.
Yeah. No, there are things we can do. Like, one of the things I don't think we've touched on is there is and anyone on the subreddit will know, there's a bot that we have, the submission statement bot. Mm-hmm. I think the submission statement started, I can't remember, it was one of ours idea, I can't remember, but it was something like a way to stop spam is to just make people have to write a short statement about why they're posting this here, so you can't just post a link and leave, and rile things up.
It's effective. It works. It
has been very, very effective.
Yeah, and the auto mod that removes accounts that are too young and don't have enough comment karma, that works. Yep. And people don't like it, and they message us all the time, oh, can we make an exception for me? And it's a good system because we don't tinker with it much.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how to work the bot. Dave set up the bot. Dave is doing other stuff, right? So I don't know how the bot works. The bot does this, get comment karma. Go comment somewhere else. Say something that other people would like to hear. Yeah, I remember that was the argument. The guy was saying that because of his disagreeableness, he would never get positive karma because he only commented on things he disagreed with, and so he wouldn't be able to use the subreddit. I was like, well,
what that says to me is he doesn't actually have any of his own good ideas about anything.
That sounds like, well, dude, I'm probably not going to miss you. That's not a huge loss to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no, seriously, it's just like you just added yourself as an insufferable asshole. Great, we don't have to
I'm just disagreeable, dude. Don't you understand? I'm just disagreeable.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It's again, the 10% of the free speech that we don't respect is very focused on the kind of folks that just would drive people crazy. And to the extent that we had been tolerant of that kind of behavior, we have since learned it was a mistake. The classic example being one reporter's opinion. Dear God.
Yeah, that took a while for us to actually do something about.
It really did force us to be like, where do we really want to draw this line? Like, we know that we have to draw it somewhere. What's the appropriate place to draw it? And I remember when we finally just made the decision to ban him. God, it's like the reports queue, just the volume declined in half almost
Oh,
immediately after that.
immediately. Yeah,
And
immediately.
that kind of just sort of spelled out, you know what? Maybe it is worth it to get rid of some folks if all they can do is be disagreeable. And he was disagreeable in the way that he wasn't even really challenging people's ideas. He was, very good at sea lioning in a way that it was hard to say that he was sea lioning.
That's There's actually a great point, and it was by a member. This was like early, and Chapo's been deleted. I just remember seeing it. I don't even have a link for it, but it was early on in like the history of the Chapo subreddit, and they're trying to figure out their moderation rules. And this guy commented, like just a random commenter, and the point he made will stick with me forever. It was no matter what you do, like if you have rules that are public, there will always be a segment of people who will buy your rules their way to just overall derailing discussion while staying within, the letter of the law, right?
Yep.
But just will derail everything every chance they get. And that was such a perfect example of like, what, dude, I'm not breaking any of the rules specifically, but just such a drag on like the productivity of the subreddit.
Yeah, and while we did sort of update like our rules and our common law system a bit to account more for one reporter's opinions behavior, there was still just a thing where you could not properly write rules for it. And so that's why we did Order 66, which is like, okay, you play games with our rules, we'll just throw it out and we'll take you out and that'll solve the problem. And then
Right.
that sends a message like, okay, obey our rules without being, again, electively autistic about it.
Yeah,
And
I do
I
think
think
things have gotten better.
I think Order 66 helped. I think there were a few things that happened around the same time that have made things in the subreddit better and why we find it more manageable now. I think Order 66, just removing folks who would tiptoe down around the rules, create a problem, and then rather often provoke somebody, and then they would report them immediately for us. Like, now we have a mess to clean up. I fucking hated that. I fucking hated
Yeah.
that. You came in here, you were cancer, and you were clever enough about it to not break the rules, make them break the rules, and now you're expecting us. Fuck that. That's why Order 66 happened, and there was a cohort of users, many of whom had been around in the subreddit since day one, and the size of the subreddit actually made them more impactful because they had more opportunities for such interactions. It wasn't as big of a problem in the early days, but that's why
We would get messages. We would get messages from like good users, people whose opinions we respected, and they're just like, "Dude, you've got to do something about this guy."
Yep.
Like this,
Yep.
these people are driving. They're like derailing everything. For a long time, we're like, "Hold on, we'll handle it. Hold on," But eventually, you just
Yeah.
there's
So
there's a great scene, and I want to say season 2 of Game of Thrones, where
mhm.
Tyrion is asking Bronn like, what'd you do about thieves? He's like, me and the boys rounded up all the known thieves. And he's like, for questioning? Nope. But the thieves are gone. At a certain point, no questions asked. Some people just have to go. And there are no more thieves. It would seem for now.
Yeah, and I would point out that while Order 66 seemed very brutish and authoritarian, because it was, um, that's a lot like how the subreddit was in the first year. We didn't have a fine system. Our rules were not like, we didn't really have like our common law system for how they applied. And so it was a lot of it's just like, well, who seems like they're bad? And, we tried to improve on it from there, but we needed to do that. But eventually we had built up this group of folks that were tiptoeing around that, and you just it's a blood clot you gotta get out of the body, and we did that. And there's not a single Order 66 ban that I regret. I didn't ban anyone unless I was really sure that they were just going to keep being a problem. And so other things that happened around that time was Russia invaded Ukraine, and when that happened, people stopped talking about COVID, and now they're talking about that and other things. And the front page has had some of the most diverse range of topics it's had in a long time. Because it used to be people would only talk about COVID, and they couldn't shut up about COVID, and they would get unusually angry about COVID. And I'm so glad that phase seems to be behind us.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Just the added responsibility of somehow, you're supposed to gatekeep information on like a pandemic is just so like outside of the realm of what I'm supposed to do. You know?
Yeah.
Like that's not our job. And so any less time I have to talk about the global or the great reset or things like this, that's time I'm better using somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So that's
I think
always
another
good.
thing that helps too is around this same time as well. A lot of these things happening at once. Is that block feature on Reddit got updated to where um, if you block somebody, not only can you not see their content, but they can't see anything you do. And if I understand it correctly, if you block somebody and you have a post on the feed of that subreddit, even if it's at the top of the feed, it's the most upvoted post, the blocked person will not be able to see it. And some people have questioned about whether or not this will create like an echo chamber effect or whatever. But I think that there's the risk of non-communication and the non-exchange of ideas through an echo chamber effect. But there's also the risk of non-communication because people talk past each other and they inflame each other. And I think that's something that's worth examining. I think the block feature seems to be helping with that kind of non-communication. So I think it's valuable in that sense. I think time will show how handy it is or not, but that's why I recently made a post sort of suggesting that people might actually give that a try rather than always report people that they can't stand. It's just if you can limit yourself to people. I mean, let's use Peterson's rule. I think this is rule 2. Make friends with people who want the best for you. If you run across a user like that, rather than wait for the day that they inevitably break the rules and you report them, you could just go ahead and block them and you don't have to worry about that person anymore. And instead, save your time for conversations that are actually interesting. Don't use the block feature on people who disagree. In fact, if you encounter someone who disagrees with you, but it's very civil about it, is very patient about it, and they're willing to go through the steps with you and have a real exchange, please don't block that person. Now that will
Right.
definitely create an echo effect. So I would say use the block feature based on character. And if somebody's poor character gets them blocked, and they suddenly realize that they're not involved in a lot of IDW discussions, maybe that's a signal to them that they need to change something about themselves. But in any event, I think in the long run, if people use the block feature that way, we'll be able to be more softer in our ban approach. We might be able to reduce the periods. And maybe our reaction can gravitate more toward trying to like talk to people before we actually hit them with a strike and a ban, and doing that. I think that would be better, but just when the volume is so high, we have to do what is time efficient. And having a sit down with the 50 people who got reported that week is not time efficient when we have all these other things going on in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, it simply doesn't work. And like you said, it's a really good thing to use on like people based on character, right? Like there's like for instance, I don't want to put his name up, but there's a person on Reddit who me and him have been messaging back and forth like long discussions for probably like 3 or 4 years now. I do not know his first name. We've never talked about that. We just purely talk like politics, and we disagree, but we message like all of the time, right? And I don't really know anything about the guy other than like he gets stuff, like he understands how things work, and he's a good dude. I gather that from character, right? We disagree, but it's fine. We can do that all of the time. But if someone is, you can tell from your brief interactions with them, this is not someone I would want to interact with. Then don't. Right, that's the easiest way to go about that. Just the block feature is great there.
Yeah, and yeah, I get it. I've heard people loud and clear, people that DM me individually about the block feature, and the concerns are good. These aren't people who are concerned about the block feature for very self-serving reasons. But I think just we have a bird's eye view, just doing what we've done for as long as we've done it, and if we have to roll the dice, I think we're going to get a better roll with the block feature than actively encouraging users not to use it or trying to rewrite our rules to deter it or punish for people who use it. I don't even know how we would do that, but like if we were to have a brainstorming session and come up with something, I don't think we would get a good system out of that. I think we would get one that's actually more repressive in some way, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, and it's as much as of like to the extent that we are repressive, I have made my peace with it. I don't want to do it if I can avoid it, and I prefer just to um,
Yeah, I would
you
say I
know
think none of us really want like power. I don't think any of us here, any of the five mods, really want to like shape our narrative and like shill our opinions to make sure they get out there or something. It's
yeah and,
the subreddit is like a public service. Like
yeah
we do things because we think we can handle it, and so we're doing it, and
yeah
that's pretty much it.
yeah. I mean, and there's just to some extent that like I'll even say like maybe I've used it to like promote things that I want to promote, but I do so with some idea that it's relevant to the community, that it basically aligns with the moderating
Yeah,
position,
with your
and
higher order values.
yeah, and there's some kind of like problem in the community that or need that it's meeting when I do that, and then anything that I would promote of my own. And I also am perfectly willing to do it for folks who have asked. And I've in fact done that. I've reached out to folks and said, hey, I could pin your post if you want to make one like about this so that it can be promoted. I have done this for other people. And this is why I encourage people to step up. It's a resource that I'm happy that I think people should be willing to use more often than they do. But ultimately, like it's not about the power; it's about solving the problems. And so we like to, you and I like to make a lot of Roman metaphors, and we do that in our own conversations. We've done it a bit here. I would
Right.
say when we look at it, when we are the co-emperors, in what sense is that? Do we really think of ourselves as kings by birth, which was the later sense of the Roman Empire? But at the beginning, it was the emperor was conceived as more as being the first citizen of the republic, and in many ways they did follow that pretty well.
Yeah.
Like the
Ultimately,
first,
we are servants of the state, right? I
yeah,
do
we come
not.
in, we
When
do
I
our
foresee
job.
myself, it's not Caligula. Hey, my minions, go stab the ocean. Be sure to get the seashells or something. We have a responsibility to ensure the good functioning order. And when barbarians scream through the doors and start raping and pillaging, they have to be stopped.
Yeah,
That's
and
yep.
yeah, we don't aspire to be like Diocletian, where we're this revered semi-holy being.
Do
We're more like
not
Augustus,
look at
where
me.
he put an end to the civil war. He shored up the borders of the empire. He didn't live in a fancy palace. He had a normal house, a normal Roman house, and he wore normal Roman clothes. And he mostly just worked on the community. He, found Roman brick and left it in marble. And there's a lot he could have done to be more self-serving in that role that he didn't. That we later saw future emperors take advantage of that he didn't. And we try to see it like this. So yeah, we're not going to like pretend that we're not acting autocratically sometimes, but that's just what motivates us when you see it happen and you're wondering like, why did they do this? This is our motivation.
Yeah, we no lavish palaces being built. Right. This is purely a sense of duty.
Yeah, we're going to build the actual finally the IDW clubhouse, and it'll have um, a jacuzzi and a bar and pool table and everything. And it'll be just for us and our close
Yeah, Peter
friends. And
Thiel Peter Thiel is going to fund it. It's going to be great. All be fun.
yeah. Well, anyway, I think that kind of just sort of covers like where we are with the subreddit, with the community, and until we need our next chat with the community, I don't think I have anything else to cover. Brandon, what about you?
No, I mean, just kind of to wrap it up, right? This is kind of just like just said, the state of the subreddit, kind of where we're at now. Just we are people, right? We're not part of any cabals, any attempts to silence you or anyone else. We have no instincts to, I don't know. It's like I remember being offended when I would get stuff removed by even like a mod who was no longer here, maybe even before Joe was. And it's like there was a plot, like they're trying to silence me. And part of this is just to understand like there is not, we're all just people. We have busy lives. We're trying our best to figure out how to do this correctly. And if you disagree with the decisions, you can message either one of us and make your case. And if it's a good case, we will likely relent
Yeah,
because we ultimately are rational, right? And so that's what we're here for.
yeah. I'll say it would be nice if we could be on somebody's payroll doing this because, like, and part of why I do the Becoming Cancel Proof series is because I don't have financial independence, and it sucks in many ways. And I know that a lot of people are in that same boat. So I'm studying ways out, and I'm sharing that with people in the community who want to learn it. And like, if somebody wants to, patronize us and you know who they are, please DM us. But until then, yeah,
Yeah,
we're
right,
doing
right.
this for
Any
free.
shadow funders, I'll take them.
Yeah, again,
From
like,
Soros to TL, I don't care. Money's
yeah,
money.
when I was living in my car, nobody stepped up to say, "Hey, Joe, I got you. Just moderate the IDW for me." Yeah, I did it in spite of the fact that it was not getting me out of my car, and I eventually did get out, but not because I was in the IDW.
No, then not correlated.
Yeah,
Well, anyway,
I
no,
mean,
this was fun, man, and I obviously enjoy the conversation. Hopefully, people get to see kind of a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, right? Like I said, no secret cabal, just the two of us usually trying to figure out what's best to do.
yeah. I'll go ahead and upload it then, and then any users out there who listen this far, yeah, please show your feedback in a comment reply once I get it on the subreddit. All right, well, I'll catch you later, Brandon. Thanks for making time for me.
All right, sounds good. See you, Joe.